By the second winter after Sarah Bell walked up to the Pine Ridge gate, people in the town would stop calling the Marsh boys wild. Sarah didn't know that yet. She only knew the schoolhouse door had been locked for 3 weeks and that the trustees who had promised her a letter of recommendation had each left the meeting without saying much. Holloway and Prescott among them. She had started to believe them. That was the part she couldn't quite forgive herself for, because she had known the closure was coming for a year. She had walked the county the way any teacher does, watching enrollments, and she had seen it. The families moving on. The mine assays coming back thin. The children pulled to work the ranches before their letters were finished. The trustees had told her drought and hard times and promised her a season more. She had taken them at their word twice. Kept the stove going through winter on her own coal money. Told herself it would turn. What turned was the lock on the door. She had $2 in her purse and a trunk at the boarding house that Mrs. Ellery would hold for the week before she needed to let the room to somebody paying. The stage east ran on Fridays and the fare was $4 and change. She had walked out that morning past the shuttered schoolhouse without looking at it and taken the North Road, because the North Road went to the ranches, and the ranches sometimes needed a hand at branding or a hand in the kitchen, and she was past the point of choosing between them. She had eaten a heel of bread at dawn. It was past 3 now. The house sat back from the road behind a good fence and a windmill turning slow in the April light. Pine Ridge Ranch. She read the burned board over the barn twice before she went through the gate, because she had been raised to read things twice before she committed to them. A man was at the trough with a bucket, shirt open at the throat, sleeves rolled past the elbow, and 2 boys stood behind him at the fence, small and dark-haired, and watching her the way barn cats watch a stranger who has not yet decided which way to move. She did not go up to the porch. She stopped at the gate and waited to be seen. The man set the bucket down. He came across the yard without hurry, wiping his hands on a rag that was already past helping. He was tall through the shoulders and thinner than a man his frame ought to be, and there was a stillness in the way he looked at her that Sarah had learned to recognize in men who had lost something recent enough that they were still standing carefully around the space it had left. "Ma'am, my name is Sarah Bell. I taught at the school in town until the trustees closed it. I am looking for supper and a place out of the wind for the night, and I have something to trade for it." He waited. His eyes went once to her coat, which had been good 3 winters ago, and once to her hands, which were empty of a bag or a bundle or anything else. He did not look at her face until last. "What have you got to trade?" "Reading, writing, arithmetic if you have use of it, your boys or your hands or yourself. An hour before supper each evening for as long as you'll have me. I'll sleep in the barn. I'll ask nothing else." The boys behind him had come closer without meaning to. The smaller one was maybe 7. The larger one was 10, perhaps 11, and his mouth was set in the particular hard line of a child who had decided already what he thought of her and did not intend to be moved. The man was quiet a long moment. Long enough that Sarah heard the windmill turn twice and a cow call from somewhere out past the barn. "How long since you've eaten proper?" Sarah did not answer. He nodded once as if the not answering had been an answer. He opened the gate. "Come in. We'll talk about the rest of it inside." His name was Daniel Marsh. He said it at the door of the house the way a man says a thing he does not much like handling. He did not offer his hand, and Sarah did not offer hers, and the boys went ahead of them into the kitchen without being told, the way boys go into a room they have been managing on their own for a long time. The kitchen was clean in the way of a house without a woman in it, which is to say the surfaces had been wiped and the dishes had been stacked, and there was nothing on the walls to say a woman had ever stood in the room at all. The stove was cold. A pot on the back of it held what looked like the end of yesterday's beans. On the shelf above the sink, a row of small squares of cardstock leaned against a tin, each one written on in a careful looping hand, the ink faded but legible. Sarah did not look at them long. She had been raised not to look long at what did not belong to her. Daniel took a loaf from the bread box and cut it without ceremony and set 2 slices in front of her at the table. He set the butter beside them. He did not sit. "Eat that first, then we'll see about the rest." She ate. She ate slower than she wanted to because a woman who ate the way she wanted to would have told him more than she cared for him to know. The boys stood at the far end of the kitchen and watched her the way she had been watched at the gate. Neither had said a word. "This is Lucas." Daniel put his hand on the older boy's shoulder. The boy did not lean into it and did not pull away. "This is Elijah." The smaller one looked down at his own boots. "Their mother passed last spring. Fever came through, took her in 8 days. Sarah set the bread down. "I'm sorry." Daniel nodded, the small tight nod of a man acknowledging the required exchange and moving past it as quickly as he could. Boys have been out of school since before that. Wasn't much school to be out of once she went. Their mother taught them their letters. "I never had cause to learn mine past signing my name, and I don't sign it often." He said it without shame and without pride. He said it the way a man reports weather. They can read then. They could. A year is a long time in a child, and they've had nobody to make them keep at it. He glanced at Lucas. Lucas is of the opinion that reading is a thing his mother did, and if he does it, he'll wear it out. Lucas's jaw set harder. He did not look at his father. Elijah will do what Lucas does. Elijah did not look up from his boots. Sarah wiped her mouth with the back of her hand because she had no napkin and had not been offered one. She looked at Lucas. "I won't ask you to read anything of your mother's, not the first day, not until you tell me I can." Lucas's eyes came up to her then, just for a second, then away. Daniel watched the exchange without moving. When it was done, he said, "The barn's dry. There's a stove in the tack room and a cot behind the harness wall my brother slept on when he came through last fall. It's yours as long as the arrangement holds." "Thank you. Supper's at dark. The boys eat at the table. You'll eat at the table. That's the arrangement, not a kindness. I won't have a woman eating in a barn on my place." "Yes, sir." "Don't sir me. Daniel'll do." He took his hat down from the peg and put it on, and he went out through the back door toward the pens, and the screen door clapped behind him twice before it settled. Sarah sat at the table with the 2 boys watching her, and the loaf of bread between them, and the row of cards on the shelf that she had not yet let herself look at properly. She slept in the tack room that night under 2 wool blankets that smelled of horse and dust and something faintly sweet, hay probably, or the last of somebody's tobacco. The stove held its heat till near morning. She woke twice, once to a coyote calling from the ridge and once to the sound of Daniel crossing the yard in the dark, boots on gravel, going to check something at the pens and coming back. She lay still both times and listened until the house door closed behind him again. At first light she washed at the pump, pinned her hair, brushed the worst of the barn from her skirt and went up to the kitchen to help with breakfast, because a woman does not sit at a man's table twice without offering her hands the second time. Daniel was at the stove already. He looked at her once, took in the pinned hair and the brushed skirt and the fact that she had come to work, and moved sideways to give her the pan. "Boys will be down in a minute. Eggs are in the crock. Bacon's on the shelf." He went out to the yard. She cracked eggs into the pan and listened to the house wake around her. Small feet on the boards upstairs. A door. A voice too low to make out and no voice answering. Lucas came down first with his shirt half-buttoned and his hair uncombed and stood in the kitchen doorway looking at her like she was a coyote that had come in through the window. "Good morning, Lucas." He didn't answer. "There's a stool by the sink if you want to help with the toast." He didn't move. She turned the eggs. She did not look at him. After a minute he came in and got the stool and dragged it to the sink and cut bread without saying anything and put it under the broiler the way his mother must have taught him, because his hands knew where the knife lived and where the broiler pan was kept and how thick to cut a slice for a boy. Elijah came down behind him and stood at Lucas's elbow and watched. When Lucas handed him the butter dish, Elijah took it to the table without being told. They ate. Daniel came back in from the yard and washed at the pump on the porch and sat down and said grace in 3 sentences and picked up his fork. Nobody spoke through the meal. Sarah did not try to make them. When the plates were cleared, she said, "I'd like to start after your morning chores, whenever that suits." Daniel looked at Lucas. Lucas looked at his plate. "After the pens are mucked and the eggs are gathered, say 10. 10 it is." She washed dishes. The boys went out. Daniel stood at the door a moment with his hat in his hand and then set it on his head and said, without turning, "There's slate and chalk in the parlor cupboard. Was hers. Use whatever you need." He went. She dried her hands and went into the parlor. It was a small room with a good rag rug and a horsehair sofa and a shelf with 6 books on it and a cupboard against the far wall. She opened it. Slate, chalk in a tin, a primer, a speller, a copy of a book of Psalms with a woman's name written inside the front cover in the same looping hand as the cards on the kitchen shelf. Ellen Marsh. Christmas 1874. Sarah closed the cover carefully and put the book back where she had found it. At 10, the boys came in. They stood in the parlor doorway like they had been sent to a whipping. "Sit down at the table, please." They sat. She put the slate between them. "We are not going to read today. Today we are going to see what you remember. Lucas, will you write your name for me?" Lucas picked up the chalk. He held it a second, then set it down. "I remember how," he said. "I just don't want to." "All right." She waited. He picked the chalk back up. He wrote his name. He wrote it in the small, tight letters of a boy who has been taught well and is trying to make the writing as small as possible so as to give the world as little of it as he can. Lucas Marsh. He set the chalk down and pushed the slate an inch away from himself and looked at the table. "That's a good hand, Lucas. Your mother taught you carefully." His jaw tightened. Sarah saw it and did not follow it. She turned the slate toward Elijah. "Your turn." Elijah looked at Lucas. Lucas did not look back. Elijah picked up the chalk and wrote his name in letters twice the size of his brother's, the E going the wrong way and the J without its dot. He set the chalk down and put both hands in his lap. "That's very good. We'll fix the E together another day. Not today." She wiped the slate clean with the corner of her apron. "I am going to write a word and you are going to tell me what it says. If you don't know, that's all right. If you know but you don't want to say, that's also all right. Nobody has to speak." She wrote hoarse. Lucas read it in his head. She could see him do it. He said nothing. "Elijah." Elijah looked at the slate a long time. His mouth worked. "Horse," he said. It came out quiet. "Yes." She wiped it and wrote barn. Elijah read it. She wiped and wrote father. Elijah read it. She wiped and wrote mother. Elijah did not read it. He looked at the slate and then at Lucas and then at his hands. Lucas stood up so fast the chair scraped. "I told you I don't want to." "You haven't said a word yet, Lucas." "I'm saying it now. I don't want to. He doesn't want to either. You can teach whoever you want, but you can't teach us." He went out. The screen door clapped. Elijah sat with his hands in his lap and did not move. Sarah wiped the slate clean. "Elijah, would you like to go after him?" He nodded. "Go on then. We'll do more tomorrow or the day after, whenever suits." He slid off the chair and went out the same door his brother had gone out. Sarah sat alone in the parlor with the slate and the chalk and the sound of the windmill turning in the yard, and she did not cry, because she had not cried in a schoolhouse in 11 years, and she was not about to start in a parlor that did not belong to her. She put the slate and chalk back in the cupboard. She went to the kitchen and started the noon meal because the arrangement was reading for supper, but the arrangement was also that she was in the house, and a woman in a house does not stand idle while a pot sits cold on the stove. At noon, Daniel came in from the pens. He washed. He sat. He looked at the stew she had put in front of him and said, "You didn't have to do this." "I know." He ate. The boys came in and sat down. Lucas would not look at her. Elijah sat next to Lucas and copied him in every particular, including the not looking. They ate in silence. When Daniel finished, he set his spoon down and said, "Quiet, how'd the lesson go?" "It went about the way I expected it to go." He nodded slowly. He did not press. After the meal, when the boys had gone out and she was at the sink, he stayed at the table with his coffee. He turned the cup once in his hands the way she had seen him turn the rag at the trough the day before. A man's small, unconscious tell. "Miss Bell." "Sarah, Sarah, if Lucas gives you trouble past what a boy ought to, you tell me and I'll speak to him, but I'd ask you not to tell me the first 3 times. Give him that." "I intended to. I thought you might." He drank his coffee. She gave Lucas 4 days. She did not call him to the parlor. She did not set the slate out. She helped in the kitchen and mended a tear in Elijah's shirt sleeve and swept the porch. And when the boys came in for meals, she spoke to them, the way she would have spoken to any child at any table, about the weather and the calves, and whether the hawk they had seen that morning had been a red tail or a marsh hawk. And Lucas answered none of it, and Elijah answered some of it in a whisper, and Daniel watched from his end of the table and said nothing. On the fifth day, she was at the kitchen shelf reaching for the tin of salt when she stopped. The cards were at eye level. She had kept her eyes off them for 4 days on principle. But her hand was there now, and the top card had shifted from where it had been the day before, which meant someone in the house had touched it recently, and the looping hand on it read Ellen's biscuits, 2 cups flour, 3 spoons lard, pinch salt, sour milk to make it soft. She read it twice. She put the salt tin back where she had found it. She went out to the porch. Daniel was mending a bridle on the bench. She sat down beside him without being invited, which was a thing she would not have done a week ago. Those cards on the shelf in the kitchen, are those hers? He did not look up from the bridle. Every one. How many are there? 40, maybe. I never counted. She wrote them out the winter she got sick. Said she wanted the boys to have her cooking after she was gone. She knew before I did. Sarah was quiet. Lucas hasn't touched them, he said. Nor Elijah. I take them down to cook from and I put them back the way she stacked them. Lucas watches me do it. Does he know what's written on them? He knew every one of them a year ago. Whether he still does, I couldn't tell you. She looked out at the yard. The windmill turned. A jay called from the cottonwood by the pens. Daniel, I'd like to try something. And I'd like to ask your permission before I do. He set the bridle down. He looked at her. Tell me. I would like to teach him to read from those cards, not the Psalms, not the primer, her cards. I think he will do it if it is her hand under his eyes and not mine. I could be wrong. If I am wrong, he will be angrier than he is now, and I will have made it worse. So I am asking. He was quiet a long time. He picked the bridle back up and worked a knot with his thumb and did not look at her. She used to read them out to him while she cooked. He'd sit on the stool by the sink. He was 7, 8. He knew the biscuit card by heart before he could read a word of it. Then he knows the words on it already. He would only be matching what he knows to what he sees. Daniel nodded slowly. Try it. If he throws it back at you, that's on me for saying yes, not on you for asking. All right. She stood up. She was at the door when he spoke again. Sarah, yes. If it works, if he does it, he stopped. He set the bridle down again and put his hands on his knees. Don't make anything of it. Don't tell him he's done a good thing. Don't tell me either where he can hear. Just let it go by. You understand what I'm saying? I understand. Good. She went inside. She took the biscuit card off the shelf. She held it a moment in her palm, feeling the weight of it, which was no weight at all, and the weight of what it was, which was considerable. Then she put it on the kitchen table where a boy passing through the room could not help but see it, and she went out to the pump to draw water for the wash. Lucas came in for water at 4. She was at the kitchen table snapping beans and did not look up. He drank at the pump and set the dipper back and turned to go, and then he stopped because the card was there on the table and he had seen it. He did not move for a long moment. Then he came to the table and picked it up. He held it the way a boy holds a bird he has found on the ground, whose living or dying he cannot yet tell. Sarah snapped beans. She did not look at him. He read it. She knew he read it because his lips moved once and stopped, and his throat moved, and he set the card down on the table in exactly the place he had found it, aligned the way she had aligned it, and went back out through the porch without a word. She snapped the last of the beans into the bowl. She put the bowl on the stove. She sat at the table a minute with her hands flat on the wood and did not let herself smile, because Daniel had asked her not to make anything of it, and she had told him she understood. The next morning she put out the card for cornbread, 1 cup meal, 1 cup flour, 2 spoons sugar, milk enough. Lucas came in at 4 for water and read it and put it back. On the third day she put out chicken and dumplings, my mother's way. He picked that one up and held it longer. He did not put it back on the table. He carried it to the shelf and set it in the stack himself in the place it belonged, and then he took another card off the stack, one Sarah had not chosen, and put it on the table where she would find it. It said molasses cake for Elijah's birthday. Elijah's birthday was 3 weeks off. Sarah had heard Daniel say so at supper. She made the cake that Saturday. She followed Ellen Marsh's card exactly, including the note at the bottom that said stir slow or it goes tough, and she let Elijah sit on the stool at the sink and watch her the way she suspected he had once watched his mother. Lucas stood in the doorway the whole time and did not come in and did not leave. When the cake came out of the oven, Elijah said, "Quiet. That smells right." Lucas said nothing. But he stayed in the doorway until the cake was on the sill to cool, and then he went out to the pens with his father and did not come in again until supper. That was the week the kitchen became a schoolroom without anyone deciding it had. Sarah stopped calling the boys to the parlor at 10. She put the slate on the kitchen table instead, and the cards beside it. And while she cooked, she wrote out words from the cards on the slate. And Lucas and Elijah drifted through the room on their way to and from chores and looked. And sometimes Lucas took the chalk without being asked and wrote a word underneath hers and set the chalk down and went out again. She learned things about Ellen Marsh from the cards. She learned Ellen had been a woman who wrote pinch of salt and good handful of sugar rather than measuring, until the winter she had gotten sick, when the measurements had come in tight and exact, because she had known the boys would need to follow them without her hand on their shoulders. She learned Ellen had preferred lard to butter for pastry and butter to lard for cakes. She learned Ellen had labeled a card for when they are sick, "Do not skip the pepper," and Sarah had stood at the shelf with that one in her hand for a full minute before she put it back. She did not learn about Ellen from Daniel. Daniel did not speak of her. He spoke of the cattle and the fence line and the price of feed, and at supper he asked Elijah about the hawk again, and Elijah told him it had been a red tail after all, and Daniel said, "Your mother would have known that at a glance," and it was the first time Sarah had heard him say the word mother in the house. Lucas did not look up from his plate, but he did not leave the table either. The night she saw the lamp in the barn burning late, she thought at first it was a lantern left by a hand, and she got up in her nightgown and wrapped her shawl around her and went out through the yard to put it out, because a lantern left burning near hay was a house fire waiting for a breeze. The light was in the tack room, her tack room. She stopped at the door. Daniel was at the small table by the stove in his shirt sleeves, with the primer open in front of him and a stub of pencil in his hand, and a piece of butcher paper spread flat on the wood. He was writing letters. He was writing them the way Elijah had written his name a month before, large and slow, and he was pressing the pencil hard enough that Sarah could see the muscles working in his forearm. He did not know she was there. She stood at the doorway a long time. Then she stepped back into the dark of the barn and made her way to the ladder and climbed up to the loft and sat in the hay with her shawl around her, because she was not going to walk back to the house past the tack room window and have him see her, and she could not go back to her own bed, because her bed was where he was sitting. She sat in the loft for an hour. When the light in the tack room went out, she waited another quarter hour, and then she came down the ladder in her stocking feet with her shoes in her hand and slipped through the door. He had put everything away. The primer was closed on the table. The butcher paper was folded in quarters and set under it. The pencil was in her tin with her own chalk. She lay down under the blankets. She did not sleep for a long time. She did not mention it at breakfast. She did not mention it that week. She watched him at supper, and she watched him at the pens when she went out to bring him coffee, and she did not once let him see that she had seen, but she made a change to the lessons. She began writing out at the kitchen table not only words from the cards but words from anywhere. She wrote fence and feed and creek and ridge. She wrote April and August and September. She wrote them large. She left the slate out overnight sometimes with a word on it and did not wipe it in the morning, and sometimes when she came down the word was still there, and sometimes it had been wiped, and sometimes underneath it in a rougher hand than Lucas's a word had been written back. Fence, feed, ridge. She never remarked on it. One evening she wrote out at the top of the slate in her clearest hand deed. Underneath it she wrote acre. Underneath that she wrote boundary. She left the slate on the table and went to bed. In the morning the words were still there. Underneath boundary in the rougher hand, someone had written boundary and then wiped it and written boundary correct. She wiped the slate clean before Lucas came down. She did not say a word. That was the last week of June. On the 1st of July, a man rode up to the gate on a good bay horse in a good coat, and Daniel went out to meet him, and Sarah watched from the kitchen window as the two of them stood at the fence a long time talking. The man had a leather satchel over his shoulder. He took a paper out of it once and showed it to Daniel, and Daniel held it and looked at it. And Sarah could see even from the window that Daniel was holding the paper the way a man holds a paper he cannot read, but does not want the other man to know he cannot read, which is to say too still and too long and with his eyes moving in the wrong pattern across the page. The man took the paper back. He tipped his hat. He rode off. Daniel came into the kitchen without taking his boots off, which he had never once done before. "Sarah." "Yes." "I need you to sit down." She sat down. He stood with his hat in his hands. He did not sit. He looked at the floor and then out the window and then, finally, at her. "Man that just left is a land agent out of the county seat. Says he represents a syndicate buying up ranch acreage north of the river. Says my boundary as recorded at the courthouse doesn't run where I've been running it. Says the North 40 and the creek pasture aren't mine and haven't been mine since the survey of '71, and if I look at the paper I'll see it plain." "Did you look at the paper?" He was quiet. "I looked at it. I couldn't read it. I held it long enough that he couldn't be sure whether I had or hadn't. Then I gave it back." "What did you tell him?" "I told him I'd want a week to think on it. He said a week was fine. He said the syndicate was prepared to make a fair offer on what was mine and take the rest off my hands quiet without going through the clerk, which he said was a courtesy. He used that word twice, courtesy." Sarah folded her hands on the table. "Daniel, where is your deed?" "In the trunk in the bedroom under her wedding dress." "Would you bring it to me?" He looked at her. There was a thing in his face she had not seen there before, and it was not shame exactly, and it was not fear exactly, but it was the neighbor of both. "You're going to read it to me." "I am going to read it with you. Bring it down." He went upstairs. She heard the trunk open and close. He came down with a folded paper in an oilcloth wrap, and he set it on the table between them, and he sat down for the first time since he had come through the door. She opened the wrap. She unfolded the paper. It was a plain deed on stiff stock, dated 1868, signed by a territorial judge whose name she did not know, and it described the parcel in the language of section and township, and range that a rancher who could not read had no way in the world to check. She read it once through to herself. Then she read it aloud, slow, one line at a time, and she stopped at the end of each line and let him repeat what she had said. And when he stumbled, she went back, and when he had the line, she went on. It took an hour. By the end of it, he could point to the section number and the township number and the range, and he could read the phrase "thence north along the meander line of the creek known locally as Pine Creek to the point of beginning," which was the phrase that mattered, because the North 40 and the creek pasture both lay inside the meander of Pine Creek, and the deed said so plainly in a hand that any man who could read at all could not have misread. She set the paper down. "Daniel, your deed says what you have been running. It says it in the clearest possible language. Whatever the agent showed you today, it was not your deed, or it was your deed with something else laid over it, or it was a paper made up entire, but it was not what is written here." He put his hands flat on the table on either side of the paper. He looked at it a long time. "Say the meander line part again." She said it again. He said it after her. He said it a third time without her. "All right," he said. "All right what?" "All right, we are going to the courthouse." "When?" "Tomorrow, first light. I want you with me. I want you to bring the slate. The slate, I want the clerk to see that I can read it. I want him to see me read it. I don't want him thinking I brought a woman in to speak for me. I want him to see the words come out of my own mouth." "All right." "And Sarah?" "Yes. Thank you." He stood up and put his hat back on and went out to the pens. They left at first light. Daniel drove the wagon and Sarah sat beside him with the deed in the oilcloth in her lap and the slate wrapped in a flour sack at her feet. The boys stayed at the ranch with a hand named Court who came over from the next place when Daniel needed a day away. Lucas had stood at the gate as they pulled out. He had not said goodbye. He had watched the wagon go and he had said, just as it turned onto the road, "Bring it back." Daniel had lifted his hand without turning. The county seat was 20 miles. They talked some. They were quiet more. Halfway there, Daniel said without looking at her, "How long have you known I couldn't read?" "Since the night I saw the lamp burning in the tack room." "That was in May." "Yes. You never said." "No." He drove a while. "Why not?" "Because you had not asked me to." He nodded once. He did not speak of it again. The courthouse was a two-story brick building on the square with a flag hanging limp in the July heat. The clerk's office was on the ground floor at the back. The clerk was a thin man named Pettigrew with ink on 2 fingers and spectacles pushed up on his forehead. He knew Daniel by name and stood when they came in, which Sarah noted, because clerks who stand for ranchers are clerks who expect ranchers to matter. Marsh. What can I do for you? I've come to look at my file, the deed, and any papers touching the boundary. Any particular reason? A man rode up to my gate yesterday saying my boundary was other than what I've been running. I'd like to see what the courthouse says it is. Pettigrew's face did a small thing, not much enough. Which man? Didn't give me his name, said he was with a syndicate. Sit down, Marsh, I'll pull the file. He went into the back. He was gone longer than pulling a file ought to take. When he came back, he had 2 folders, one thick and one thin, and he set them both on the counter. This is your file. This is a file I opened last month on a claim filed against your parcel by a party I am not at liberty to name until the claim goes to hearing. The claim asserts an error in the original survey and requests a correction of the recorded boundary. If the correction is granted, the North 40 and the Creek pasture revert to territorial land which the claimant has petitioned to purchase. Daniel took the deed out of the oilcloth. He set it on the counter. He set the slate beside it. He did not unwrap the slate. Mr. Pettigrew, I would like to read my deed to you. Pettigrew looked at him. Marsh, I would like to read it to you, aloud, now. Pettigrew was quiet. Then he said, all right. Daniel opened the deed. He read it. He read it slowly, and he stumbled twice, and he went back both times and got the line and went on. And when he came to the phrase thence north along the meander line of the creek known locally as Pine Creek to the point of beginning, he read it clean. He set the paper down. That is my deed. That is what it says. The North 40 and the Creek pasture lie inside the meander of Pine Creek. They are mine and have been mine since 1868. Whatever the claim on your other file says, it is not consistent with this paper. I would like that noted in the record. Pettigrew took his spectacles off his forehead and put them on his nose. He looked at Daniel over them a long moment. Marsh, who else has come to you with a paper? A man yesterday. There have been others before. A man last fall about the water rights. A man the winter before that about the north fence. I signed nothing. But I couldn't have told you then what any of their papers said. And now you can. Now I can. Pettigrew set his pen down. Marsh, sit down. I want to hear the whole thing from the beginning. They were in Pettigrew's office 3 hours. When they came out, the claim had been withdrawn from the docket pending an investigation. Pettigrew said he was going to run himself, and the name of the land agent had been written on a piece of paper Pettigrew had folded twice and put in his inside coat pocket. And Daniel had signed his own name to a sworn statement that he had read aloud from beginning to end before he had put his pen to it. They drove home in the last of the afternoon light. Daniel did not speak for the first 10 miles. Then he said there were 4 others, 4 other men, 4 other papers over the last 2 years. I never signed any of them, but I came close on the water rights one. Came close because he'd been at me 3 visits and I was tired. You didn't sign it. I didn't sign it, but I could not have told you why not. It was not because I knew. It was because I was tired that day of being asked. Sarah looked at the road ahead. You have been protecting this place with nothing but stubbornness for 2 years. Longer than that. Longer than that, then. He drove. Sarah, yes. When we get home, I'd like to say something to Lucas. In front of you, would that suit? It would suit. They came up the track at dusk. Lucas was at the gate. He had been at the gate, Sarah suspected, since the wagon had left that morning, though he had likely gone to the pens and back a dozen times pretending he had not been. Elijah was on the porch step. Court raised a hand from the barn door and went back inside. Daniel pulled the wagon up. He set the brake. He climbed down. He walked to the gate where Lucas stood. Lucas, I want to tell you something. Miss Bell taught me to read this spring. I have been working at it in the barn at night. Today I read my own deed in front of the county clerk, and I stopped a man from taking the North 40 and the Creek pasture off this ranch. I could not have done it without her. I want you to know that. I want you to know that I could not read a year ago and I can read now, and it is because a woman came to our gate and asked for supper. Lucas did not look up. Look at me, son. Lucas looked up. Your mother taught you your letters because she wanted you to have what she had. Miss Bell has kept you at them because she wants the same. They are not the same woman. They will never be the same woman, but they wanted the same thing for you. I would like you to remember that." Lucas's mouth worked. He did not speak. He nodded once tight. Then he turned and went to the porch and sat down beside Elijah, and Elijah leaned against his shoulder, and Lucas did not push him off. That fall, Daniel rebuilt the schoolhouse in town with his own hands and two of Court's brothers and a crew of ranch fathers who had heard what had happened at the courthouse. The trustees who had closed it did not come to the raising. Halloway and Prescott drove past on the road once. They did not stop. The school opened again in October. Sarah taught it. She rode in from Pine Ridge every morning and rode home every evening, and she ate supper at the Marsh table, and she slept in the tack room until the first hard frost. The night of the frost, she came in to bank the kitchen stove before going out to the barn, and Daniel was at the table. In front of him was a single card, cut from the same stock as Ellen's cards but new and written on in his own careful large hand. The letters pressed a little too hard, the way a man presses when he is not yet sure of them. "Marry me." She read it. She read it again. She looked up at him. He did not speak. He had already said on the card everything he had come there to say. She took the chalk from the tin on the shelf. She wrote her answer on the slate. She turned it toward him. Yes. Outside, the windmill turned. Inside, he closed his hand around hers and held it and did not let go.